many people believe that, okay, the previous order is more or less out of function, but the new one is to come. So again, that's the hypothesis of the International Valdai Club, but we don't expect any new order to emerge anytime soon. It doesn't mean necessarily a chaotic development, but the very much regulated international system, as we got used to during the Cold War and the short period after the Cold War, this kind of international organization is over. And now the question is, of course, how world could be organized and functioning in years and maybe decades to come. Are discussing today. Groupings, both G20 and BRICS, those are new. Those are not inherited from the Cold War time, as most of other organizations. And the question is, based on which principles they can be most efficient, if they can. Of course, we see a lot of new developments, both in G20 and BRICS. When it comes to the G20, I think our South African friends know it much better than us this year, that the new, actually unseen before problem emerged, that one of countries, the biggest country in the G20, decided to sabotage it, not to participate. That's a new situation because we didn't expect it before. About BRICS, that's another very interesting development. On the one hand, extension of BRICS gave us much more opportunities and gave BRICS a bigger, so to say, international dimension. At the same time, the more countries, member states and partners, the less homogeneous this system is and will be. And of course, the more complicated to find common ground. I think in this part of our discussion, we can raise a couple of questions about how, first of all, those organizations can interact. Do they need to interact? And secondly, whether both structures, both groupings, have bright future, and what kind of bright future we will have. I'm very delighted to give the floor to the first speaker, who is online, the only person online in our conference, Mr. Dmitry Berychevsky, Director of the Department of Economic Cooperation in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please, Mr. Berychevsky.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Fedor? Colleagues, can you hear me?
Dmitry, can you hear us?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Okay, Fedor. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Very warm greetings from Moscow. I'm not sure whether it is hotter here or in South Africa, but anyway, of course, I wish I could be with you physically, but it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to highlight a few issues about G20 and BRICS today. President Putin speaking before, just ahead of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, said that the new world order is emerging anyway, and we are just witnessing it and slightly technically contribute to its formation. So there is no way back. And South Africa's presidency in the G20, is of great importance for us because it is the first time that an African country has assumed leadership in this key economic forum, international economic forum. And this is one of manifestations of the emergence of the new world order. This year rounds off the first cycle of presidencies, which offers a good opportunity to review our past efforts and discuss the goals ahead. So this year also we have several anniversary dates. It is an exceptional historic year for our countries. Namely, it is the 80th anniversary of our victory in the Second World War, and it is the year of the foundation of the UN, as well as the 65th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Declaration on Decolonization. So this year, our friends in South Africa are steadily setting the tone for G20 endeavors, with a focus on urgent issues of economic growth, food security, artificial intelligence, debt burden, critical minerals, which were, outlined by our colleague Madame Mazibuko, which highlighted to us all the priorities of the South African presidency. Well, just last Saturday, the G20 Development Ministerial Meeting convened in Mpumalanga, opening a number of high-level G20 events this year. It provided with successful adoption of documents on sensitive matters for Africa, such as illicit financial flows and social protection. Now we embark on the final stretch towards the November G20 summit. Against the backdrop of rising geo-economic fragmentation, G20's activities attract really increasing attention. The forum adopted its present form in 2008. Well, it was like a crisis manager on numerous occasions. And now G20 has remained resilient and efficient even at the peak of Western anti-Russian hysteria in recent years. Today it continues to develop very much needed consensus solutions on pressing economic and global issues. The successive chairmanships of BRICS countries in 2022-2025 made a significant input to the productive work of the G20. Thanks to the well-balanced and independent stance of recent chairs, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and now South Africa, we could advance a unifying agenda at the forum and transform it into a major channel to enable equitable communication among the largest economies. The cycle of the BRICS leaderships in G20 coincided with the steady strengthening of its positions in economic affairs. Today, BRICS and G7 shares in the global GDP are measured as 40% and 29%, respectively. The mounting influence of BRICS asserts it as a center for growth, innovation, and one of the main pillars of a new and more just world order. Its principles of consensus, equality, mutual consideration of each other's interests resonate with a growing number of countries in the global south. And it enhances the role of BRICS as a sort of spokesperson for the world majority. In G20, increasing weight and consolidation of a new pole of power enabled to rectify the long-standing pro-Western bias and to focus discussions on the needs of developing nations. Finally, what we have at the top of our agenda is the long overdue issues of how to make economic governance more democratic and eliminate digital and technological divides between the global north and global south. Such problems as illegitimate sanctions and other methods of unfair competition, alongside the failure of developed countries to deliver on their ODA commitments, were accorded the attention they rightly deserved. South African presidency has predictably placed G20 emphasis on the African agenda, a step that we fully support. Amidst the alarming developments in the global economy, situation in African countries looks particularly precarious. They routinely have to deal with the aftermaths of colonialism, thriving neo-colonial practices, and inequitable division of labor. Their takes at the development and industrialization get hindered by proliferating protectionist barriers, unbearable borrowing costs, and draining of resources. Together with like-minded partners, we take efforts to consolidate the achievements of the BRICS presidencies in the G20 and give a strong political impetus to overcoming challenges faced by developing countries, especially in Africa. We suggest our colleagues consider providing a permanent seat for BRICS in G20. Africa will only benefit from boosting cooperation with BRICS as a conduit for the priorities of the global South and East, including at major multilateral fora. BRICS membership now comprises South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia, who seek to promote both national objectives and Pan-African agenda. Since 2025, Nigeria and Uganda have joined in as partner states. In addition, further enlargement of the new development bank through African shareholders seems rather promising. The status of BRICS as a leading international format was vividly stressed at the summit in Kazan in 2024 and in Rio this year. The key results of Russian and recent Brazilian chairmanship keep evolving. That includes initiatives to interbank cooperation and elaboration of independent settlement and insurance instruments. Also, broad support was given to our proposals on the new mechanisms of exchange trading, strengthening the resilience of supply chains and resistance to protectionism. Both in Kazan and in Rio, member states committed to building a just, resilient, polycentric world order and put an end to the Western dominance in the Bretton Woods institutions. We will continue to advance this common ground within the G20. Finally, Russia is a responsible contributor to the development agenda, both bilaterally and in international venues. Our focus is on maximizing the potential of Russian-African partnership. Every year, St. Petersburg International Economic Forum serves as an acclaimed platform for promoting Africa's interests. And we, again, provide our heartfelt thanks to Vice President Mashatile for his participation.
Groupings, both G20 and BRICS, those are new. Those are not inherited from the Cold War time, as most of other organizations. And the question is, based on which principles they can be most efficient, if they can. Of course, we see a lot of new developments, both in G20 and BRICS. When it comes to the G20, I think our South African friends know it much better than us this year, that the new, actually unseen before problem emerged, that one of countries, the biggest country in the G20, decided to sabotage it, not to participate. That's a new situation because we didn't expect it before. About BRICS, that's another very interesting development. On the one hand, extension of BRICS gave us much more opportunities and gave BRICS a bigger, so to say, international dimension. At the same time, the more countries, member states and partners, the less homogeneous this system is and will be, and of course the more complicated to find common ground. I think in this part of our discussion, we can raise a couple of questions about how, first of all, those organizations can interact. Do they need to interact? And secondly, whether both structures, both groupings, have a bright future, and what kind of bright future we will have. I'm very delighted to give the floor to the first speaker, who is online, the only person online in our conference, Mr. Dmitry Berychevsky, Director of the Department of Economic Cooperation in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please, Mr. Berychevsky.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Fedor? Colleagues, can you
system will fall apart and different parts will emerge which will function differently, individually. So that's, I think, the first time in the history when we have rising demand for sovereignty and fragmentation and individual freedom for countries to act in the environment which is very much interconnected, and there is no chance that it will be changed. And I think it's enormous challenge to all of us who try to find how to analyze it. I give the floor to a very good friend of the Valdai Club, frequent visitor of our events, Pilar Nimtembo, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the invitation and for this important forum, I think, for discussion. So I'll, sort of taking on the sort of the thematic focus of this session is really just start by, saying both the G20 and the BRICS presidencies of recent years take place obviously within a very fragmented geopolitical landscape, a changing geopolitical landscape. And I think in that sense, it's elevated, I think, the importance and the focus on these two fora in this particular time. We've also seen changes, of course, in the development finance landscape. I think in as much as we focus on the US cutting aid and basically making huge reforms in its State Department and so forth, I think some of the changes we see in the US are also preceded by other changes that have been taking place in other Western capitals. So for instance, the trend towards taking development finance and putting development finance funds and putting them into military expenditure. The UK has done that already previously. We saw the UK making reforms to its sort of development infrastructures. But we've also seen pressure in other European capitals where the pressure has essentially been about restricting development finance and increasing defense budgets. This has not been the case in the Global South. In fact, if anything, the Global South has been looking to actually extend their role as sources of development finance and as sources of development cooperation. And I think this is quite important. So when we contrast, for instance, the dynamics we see within the G20 and the dynamics within the BRICS, they take place within that broader international landscape. On the G20, I think it's been quite obviously important to note the uniqueness of the last few presidencies, taking into account that this has been a unique sequence of Global South G20 presidencies. And given the uniqueness of this period, I mean, when from Indonesia to India to Brazil and then to South Africa, it almost seems inevitable that in following that unique sequencing, who does it go to next? it goes to a US led by the Trump administration. So it's quite an interesting, sequence to see what the continuity that we have seen in these last few years, what takes place to that continuity and to that focus and to the agenda setting that we have seen. I would argue, in fact, that had it not been for the diplomatic skill that we saw by these global South countries, I would argue that the G20 would be in ICU at the moment, because there was a challenge in the G20 where the focus of the G20 was being almost distracted by geopolitical tensions, and there was a push by some countries to move the G20 away from its key focus areas on the economic governance issues and to actually move it towards other geopolitical issues and tensions. And I would argue that had it not been for the diplomatic skill of these global South countries, the G20 would really be in a worse position, today. So these countries have played a key role in steering the G20 in this time. Of course, it has not ignored geopolitics. You cannot ignore geopolitics. However, I think they've done a sterling job in actually steering this institution in a fractured geopolitical landscape. Of course, during South Africa's presidency, government has prioritized areas that fall broadly under the themes of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And some of that has translated into saying, how can we achieve more inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and reducing inequality? When we talk industrialization, just to illustrate how things have changed in recent times, we came from a period, where countries were essentially, or at least developing countries, were being discouraged from actually forging industrialization policies. Instead, they were being told to privatize more. They were being told, to reduce the role of the state in key sectors of the economy. And, the fact that, during this presidency of the G20, South Africa has basically said, yes, inclusive growth, industrialization, employment, and reducing inequality. It tells you that, industrialization is certainly firmly back on the global policy agenda. With all the critiques we may have with the US at the moment, I think it's very important to note that in as much as we criticize them, but we also need to not just criticize and sit back. We need to identify what are the opportunities that actually this administration in the White House opens, for countries in the global South, where, for instance, during the height of the sort of Washington consensus, you could not, it was very difficult to prioritize industrial policy, because even within the World Trade Organization, countries were actually finding it very difficult in that space. So I think we need to, yes, understand the challenges, but also look at some of the opportunities that may open up going forward. Food security has also been prioritized, artificial intelligence, data governance, and of course, innovation for sustainable development. How that has translated into certain actions within the G20 in terms of prioritization, South Africa has said we need to take action to strengthen disaster resilience and response. We need to take action to ensure debt sustainability for low-income countries. Of course, debt sustainability is a key issue also for Africa, because a challenge that we identify is especially when loans are provided in US dollars. When financing is provided in US dollars, you might have what looks like a favorable interest rate today, and maybe have to repay it over a 20-year, 30-year period, it may look favorable today. But when you factor in currency fluctuations, you know, with loans that are denominated in dollars, you end up repaying way more than you actually would have wanted to repay. And here, BRICS, I think some of the interventions that have come in through BRICS become quite instrumental in terms of actually leading some of the discussions within the G20, because the BRICS, through the New Development Bank, has been quite clear in saying that by 2026 we want 60% of credit or of loans that are extended to be extended in local currencies. Now, this is something that is quite important, but it's a discussion that will no longer just be confined within the frameworks of the BRICS. It is something that is being discussed now in other fora, beyond the G20 and also beyond the BRICS itself. And this is quite important, I think, in influencing ongoing discussions. Of course, mobilization of finance for a just energy transition is important, but here again, it becomes important for South Africa to balance some of the discussions happening within the G20 with the discussions happening within BRICS. So for South Africa, a country, yes, that continues to have, you know, coal resources and so on and so forth, yes, it supports the just energy transition, but not at the expense of jobs, of development, and so forth. So this is important. So as South Africa straddles both the G20 and the BRICS, it informs some of the strategies at a national level, but also at a regional level. And I think this is quite important. And then sort of, you know, and I don't want to go too long because I think, you know, also time is against us. However, I think you know, it's important to note that the absence or the low-level participation of the United States should not be given. I think it shouldn't be our sole focus. The participation of the United States will not make or break South Africa's G20 presidency. I think that must be very, very clear and unequivocal. The point here, colleagues, is that the U.S., it must be seen in a broader context where the U.S. is pursuing what it views as America first. It's changing all of its engagements at international fora. It's pulling out of different fora and so on and so forth. So we cannot associate success of South Africa's G20 with U.S. participation because in general, you know, the U.S. is the U.S. pulled out of the Financing for Development conference and other fora, UNESCO most recently. So what South Africa needs to continue to do is to continue to engage with those who are involved in the G20. It needs to engage with its traditional partners, but also some who also feel the negative brunt of U.S. policies. And I think what is becoming important is the importance of strengthening relations amongst middle powers in the global north and in the global south throughout South Africa's presidency. Lastly, colleagues, it's just to underscore the fact that the BRICS continues in terms of reforming, looking to reform international institutions from within, but whilst also creating institutions from outside. So it's a dual strategy of reforming from within, whilst also applying pressure from outside existing multilateral institutions. The dynamics of expansion, of course, will continue to play out. They come with both challenges and they come with opportunities when it comes to expansion. But I think it was very smart to have expansion along two tracks, both amongst core members, but also amongst the category of partner countries. Because had BRICS not done that, it would have failed to basically utilize the momentum that has been created by the BRICS. Remember that a lot of countries want to participate, whether as full members or not full members. So if you just kept it to the 5, then that enthusiasm that comes from outside may have weathered down. So the way of creating partner countries as a formal category, whilst also dealing with core country expansion, is a strategic move, but one that has to continue to be managed, especially, I think, still amongst the 5 members. And my last point is we must not forget that expansion of BRICS did not start in 2023 with South Africa's presidency. The expansion of BRICS started with South Africa joining BRICS. That is when expansion began, and so South Africa is critical and central in the discussion on BRICS expansion. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Pilani, for such a brilliant input in our discussion. I think you touched upon a very, very important issue about the essence of the international cooperation now and in the future. Because many people before and still now in BRICS countries and outside the BRICS countries, they still ask, what is BRICS? Is it an alliance? Is it international organizations and so on? And frankly, it's very difficult to explain what the BRICS is. But more and more, there is a feeling more and more that just this characteristic of BRICS is probably the strongest side of it. Because BRICS creates not a formalized structure of multilateral cooperation, which is important but very difficult in these days, and we see it. What happens with G20 and so on. But BRICS creates an environment which is broadening, with all problems inside, no doubt about that. But this environment is not anti-anything. That's another accusation against the BRICS and what Mr. Trump is doing, that's anti-American structure. It's not anti-American. It's alternative to the world where America wants to dictate everything. So they may do what they want, but we do the same. And I think that if we will be able to continue in this spirit, if we will be able to give another understanding of multilateralism, because the previous understanding of multilateralism was very much, okay, formalized, but the multilateralism might be different. So that will be the biggest achievement of BRICS. Using this opportunity, I would like to draw your attention to 2 reports produced by Valdai Club to this event, and one is authored by Professor Barabanov, Evolution of the BRICS Platform of Shared Values. I must say that's absolutely fascinating reading. I couldn't believe that all this can be analyzed. And the second report is South Africa and Russia, a long-lasting legacy of strategic cooperation by Sanusha Naidu and Daria Zelenova. That's much more about Russia, South Africa, but also very, very interesting. So now we go to so-called discussants, but this is more or less the same, I think. Yelena Maslova from GIMO, please.
Hello. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the organizers, the Valdai Club and the SAIA, for the invitation. It's indeed a pleasure to be here in South Africa. I would like to draw a bit attention to BRICS and its further development. Well, we all know that BRICS is expanding gradually, both in terms of membership and its agenda. And we all see that BRICS now is evolving from a club of the largest emerging economies to a platform representing the voice of the global majority. And this process of progressive consolidation of the BRICS reality marks an element of novelty in international relations and international scenario, and has a significant impact on its evolutionary process. And now its focus is not only on discussing ways of intra-BRICS cooperation, but also on developing new approaches to global governance that reflects the interests and priorities of the global majority. So certainly it is not easy to reach common positions on all matters, but narrowing existing gaps to the emerging global agenda is critically important. And to precise, BRICS is developing joint approaches to issues where there is no global governance. One example is artificial intelligence, which is now the subject of a BRICS declaration, and it's the first BRIC to develop principles for international regulation of artificial intelligence. Other promising topics include climate change, of course, and the declaration on climate finance is a very important step forward. Even if the declaration is just a declaration, but it contains principles, and in the future such principles will form the basis for new approaches at the COP summit. And this all means that BRICS is gradually becoming one of the key platforms for climate dialogue as well. And BRICS should strive to create a single space for climate finance implementation. Such a single space will make it possible to reduce emissions where it's cheapest to do so, but this requires a common infrastructure for carbon markets and green finance. Other promising areas, as it was already said, include energy, food security, and maybe even space. It is also important to understand, as it was already said, but by Professor Lukyanov, that BRICS is not a tool of confrontation, but rather a space for beneficial cooperation in addressing global challenges. So BRICS is not against anything, but it is only for development and dialogue, first of all. And BRICS is open to dialogue and new members. By the way, the idea of possibly bringing new partners into BRICS was first mentioned in a declaration adopted at the BRICS summit in China in 2011, and in 2013 South Africa became the first country to invite to the BRICS summit representatives of African regional organizations, the African Union and the Economic Community of Western African States. And by 2017 a tradition of developing partnerships in the BRICS region has been established. And today this idea sounds more than natural. We have different modes of cooperation in BRICS, such as BRICS outreach format and BRICS Plus, and this potential cooperation for South Africa lies in the BRICS outreach format as well, as far as BRICS countries and South Africa are members of various sub-regional associations. And when we talk about the strategic tasks, strategic goals of BRICS, I would say that the strategic task of BRICS, in my opinion, it is dialogue by itself. And here we can refer to the experience of ASEAN, where the process itself, that is a dialogue, is already a result. Yes, of course, BRICS members set themselves very precise goals, but and BRICS is not just like a coffee shop, but dialogue is very important as it creates a strategic condition for cooperation. And the strategic condition for cooperation is creation of the spirit of BRICS, a spirit of trust and mutual respect, because this is the basis of all normal relations. And we can now talk about the nascent BRICS spirit. So that is what the report of Professor Barabanov. And this BRICS spirit includes values such as mutual respect, mutual understanding, sovereign equality, solidarity, openness, inclusiveness, consensus. And so the strategic goal is to be a transformative, creative force for BRICS. Because for a long time Western institutions were the only creators of ideas, models and principles. So as a platform, BRICS holds a potential to undermine this monopoly and to develop proposals that represent the interests of global majority countries beyond just the BRICS members. So, as it was already said, of course, this does not mean that BRICS is entering into a confrontation with Western institutions, but it is becoming a force that shapes world order as well. And the strength of BRICS lies in the fact that it is an open platform with no strict rules, which means that BRICS is very flexible. So at the end, BRICS can be anything you want it to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. BRICS is obviously not trying to antagonize anybody. Unfortunately, some of them do it vis-à-vis BRICS, so that's a very interesting development. So what I heard from colleagues who participated in the BRICS summit in Rio recently, and we know that there were some expectations, or some people thought that Brazil will be less enthusiastic about BRICS this year than Russia was last year, for example. But thanks to President Trump, who put very big pressure on BRICS just during this conference, and especially he promised to introduce 50% tariffs on Brazil because of his personal relationship with the former President Bolsonaro. So all those whom I asked said that this summit was much better than anybody expected, and Brazil was very much committed to this development. Nurhan, please.
Let me first of all express my gratitude and deep thanks to His Excellency Mr. Andrei Bistresky, and also my colleague Oleg Parbanev for invitation. And I'm so really, it is a pleasure and honor to be with you all, and particularly Professor Lukyanov. Actually I don't have that much to rise, but let me focus on 5 main points I would like to share with you. First of all, the rise of the South. I think the weight of global South and the influence of our global South increased dramatically along maybe the last decade, particularly because BRICS and G20, I saw them 2 very important driving powers toward that new world order we all dream of. They succeeded to change a lot of what was exist, particularly economically, and for sure economically it means will have politically and strategically consequences. So I also think that there are deep changes, not only economic but strategically going on, as I think we all agree. This is one of the most important things that now we are as a global South matter a lot, not only for that competition among colonial powers or colonization powers, but we are now a very important player in international politics. We can do a lot, and we did a lot up to the moment. The second point, what I called a maturity of global South. For a long time, we don't have like a canvas to all, we all as a global South. Sometimes we are with the United States, sometimes with the Soviet Union, sometimes with France, like that. Maybe we lost for a long time our direction, but I think that all global South now becoming mature enough to identify its own interests, to have its own priorities, and also its own way to achieve those priorities. We are not now going to such ideological alliances, but we are searching for interests. And we are, at the global South, we are with the one who, or the much we can achieve, the one who will be with. I think this is very important, and that's why G20 and the BRICS very important platforms for Global South, because we in G20 and the BRICS we have a very important, respectable identity. I mean, and also opportunities. We have opportunities in both BRICS and G20, which is not allowed or available in other platforms. I think most of our countries suffered and still suffer from World Bank, from IMF, from etc. Institutions, and this is the time to have a respectable institution giving us respectable opportunities, fair opportunities. This is also, I think, very important. The third is that the world is now much larger than the United States and the West. Professor Lakanov mentioned that the United States will not join BRICS or G20 and making pressures over BRICS. It's okay. They are defending themselves. They are trying to still holding hegemony over the whole world. Okay, but I think that is not the issue right now, and we shouldn't focus that much about that. If the United States will not join G20, I think it will isolate itself. Not G20, not the Global South. They're isolating themselves, not us as a Global South. So I think this is very important, and the presidency of South Africa in G20 really a breakthrough and one of the landmarks for, as I mentioned, the rise of the South from one hand, and that the world change and it is larger than the United States, because now we have Global South countries saying no, saying this is not in our favor or interest, and we have the right to choose our way. And that was, I think, also clear in the that Ukrainian crisis, that we didn't stuck with the United States and the West. We chose also our own way in that competition or that struggle. Third, I think BRICS and G20 very important powers leading significant change in world order. They did a lot toward multipolar world. They are not replacing IMF or World Bank or G7, but at least they are alternative or introducing alternatives. Alternatives giving us chances, giving us opportunities in the South, respect the South share and South participation in them, and I think this is very important, because without Global South there will not be a new world order, either economically or politically and strategically. Maybe yes, we did a lot, and I think BRICS and the G20 did a lot to change many of the old mechanisms that govern the whole world since the Second World War and maybe before, up to 10 years ago, but still we need a lot. We need more and more from BRICS and from G20. The idea raised right now about connecting BRICS and G20 and making G20 a member by way or another in G20, this is very important to link BRICS with G20, because our aims and goals in both are common. But actually we need more, even in two levels, in that bilateral and multilateral level, through or within BRICS and G20, and also we need more and more on bilateral level or African Pan-Africanism or intra-Africanism level. I really review, for example, the trade among us, And I was shocked that it is only 192 billion dollar, comparing with 296 billion with China. So our mutual trade with African trade is less than the trade between China and Africa. Yes, I know that China is nobody can compare to China. I know that they are doing I don't know, but we can still do a lot, and our economy, our participation and partnership in that would be very great. Also in banking, linking banking system. Actually, BRICS introduce and suggest many mechanisms very important, like a linking banking system out of SWIFT bank, like dealing in national currencies, in joint investments in development projects, linking infrastructure to have like our dream to connect Cairo with Cape Town in one railway road. This is also, yes, this is dreams, but I think we can achieve it by way or another. We have a long way, but we can have the first step. Maybe after 10 years, 20 years, all this will come up. But this is very important to really adopt, to have national currencies in our trade. So in Egypt, we cannot deal with, or we cannot change directly, for example, not only ruble, but unfortunately even any other African currencies. The same, I think, here in South Africa. Why? We should create some mechanism to overcome the old mechanism totally. Thank you so much again, and I want also to thank Mr. Stephen Gross for hospitality and for everything. Thank you so much, and welcome to any question.
Thank you very much. The train from Cairo to Cape Town, that's a good goal. So let's start to work on it. Gustavo, please.
Thank you very much. And just as for those of you looking into the program, I'm not Prof. Superman Lazondi. Unfortunately, he had some health issues that he couldn't come here today. He's fine. But what I wanted to do is just to check, how many minutes do I have?
7, 8.
Great. So I wanted to build from some of the earlier discussions. And I think it's important for us when we're looking into the role of groups like G20 and BRICS within the context of what we describe as a fractured world order, for us to understand what is this world order that we are dealing with. What do we mean by fractured? Because I think sometimes it leads us to make statements, and I'm not specifying anyone here, like this is a overgeneralization of narratives, of terms like multipolarity, for instance. What is multipolarity that we are talking about? If we are traditionally looking into multipolarity, we tend to look into how Europe was organized in the 1900s and the idea of the concert of Europe, where you had a number of countries more or less the same size, more or less the same power capacity, that were somehow competing within that space. I think what we do understand with this fragmentation, fractured, or different space for us in terms of where the world is going to, is one that there is a spread of countries that are now more powerful than what they were a couple of decades ago. You have two countries that, with no doubt, are above the rest in terms of their own capabilities and capacity, and that it's not surprisingly US and China. The US may be more powerful than China in certain things, China may be more powerful than the US in other things, but no one quite denied the fact that they are peer competitors. Why am I saying those things in the context of BRICS? Because I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, are we thinking of multipolarity as a wishful thinking? This is what we would like to see in the world? Or are we responding to how the reality is already constructed? For me, institutions like the G20 and BRICS are responding to existing realities as well as it is trying to transform portions of that reality. We've just published a special edition of the South African Journal of International Affairs where we reflected on an expanded BRICS in the context of the global order. And the question we asked for that edition was, are we shaping the global order or are we being shaped by it? At large, it's a mix of both. There are specific issues that BRICS countries as a collectively would like to change the way on the management of certain global governance issues, and particularly the role that its members should have in terms of voting rights in the World Bank, in the IMF, reform of the UN Security Council. But these countries also realize that within the context where we are, BRICS is an important avenue for this process of diversification that so many countries are going through. But that brings a lot of inherent questions and tensions within the group. We've seen that happening this year alone. We were talking about the Brazilian presidency, but one of the big priorities that Brazil tried to pursue this year was the issue of institutionalization, predictability of decisions, and more clarity in terms of knowledge tracking and generation. The reason why it's not easy is that all, in principle, would agree that, oh yeah, it would make far more sense if we have a more predictable structure for us. But that more predictable structure goes against one of the biggest assets of the group, that is the flexibility. The reason why we moved from 200 meetings that were done in 2023 under the South African presidency to around 250 meetings that were done in Russia last year, to a drop to 100 meetings that we had in BRICS this year, is because BRICS operates in a way that the chair has a lot of say on how the agenda is structured, but it doesn't mean that the chair always gets its way. Because for BRICS countries, the idea of consensus is not only a decision-making process. It's not just a procedural matter. It's perceived as a value, that it's the way in which a set of very diverse countries, what is that to bring them together, is often the question that it gets asked, and often asked by Western counterparts. Because if we look into a lot of the Western institutions, they tend to be maximizing unity. We're looking for this idea that there, as a collective, we agree on all of those universal principles that we then going to pursue them towards. BRICS operates almost on the reverse. We understand that there is a lot between us, that we don't trade as much with one another, we don't even often understand one another. We have different monetary policies, we have different systems of governments, we have different approaches, but there's certain things within the group that they find that this configuration is particularly useful. To something that Sanusha and I wrote in a piece earlier this year that creates a very interesting dynamics of countries agreeing to disagree. Because if something is so controversial within BRICS countries that you know you're never going to find consensus, you have three things that you can do. You can take the issue completely out of the agenda and very directly acknowledge that there may be other institutions better positioned for that. You can dilute that language in something that almost means nothing, but it is a placeholder until the period that you're able to find that consensus. Or you heavily negotiate. A lot of the myths that somehow have been presented here have to do with that. Because for us, coming from countries that are members of BRICS, and as academics and think tankers, we spend a lot of our time explaining what BRICS is and what BRICS is not. both to our own domestic constituencies, cross-BRICS constituencies, but particularly for non-BRICS constituencies. And that, I think, it's the one aspect that for African countries, for Russia, and for every other members, we should really see seriously. I don't think we have an identity crisis after expansion, but there's certainly a need for soul-searching process that make us better understand what we want to get from it and how do we make these things better. Brazil didn't get all it wanted with the institutionalization efforts, and it's normal. I think we have media colleagues here, and perhaps that is a good lesson for media. There tends to be almost an obsession with what the heads of states and the chairs say throughout the year, and explain that as if it's the BRICS positions. We saw it this year in Brazil. We saw that even more in Russia last year, where sometimes national positions were presented as BRICS positions. Because of consensus, if you're looking to any given declaration, it's considerably more conservative than what we would believe that those declarations would be. And why are they so conservative? Because in order to achieve consensus, you need minimum common denominators. And the countries, we know how different we are to one another. We know that BRICS is not going to be the best forum to discuss everything, but it's a damn good forum for certain things that we think that it could be done. Thank you very much. I think we're just over 30 seconds of the 8 minutes you gave me, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. I think you said very important thing. Culture to agree to disagree. On the one hand, it sounds a little bit poor, because the notion of the goal of any international grouping is to agree at the end of the day. At the same time, it sounds, from my point of view, actually much better than the alternative, because what we see on the other side, and you said that the West is trying to maximize unity. True, but at which cost? We saw yesterday so-called negotiations between United States and the European Union about the trade deal. Any result can be characterized as a deal, but looking from the outside, it seems that the European Union basically accepted all demands from the United States, and that was it. If the unity is being achieved through such means, then probably agree to disagree is better, at least for a while. Okay, we have some time to discuss, and that was the meaning of the conference. So please raise your nameplates or hands or whatever. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank the colleagues that made speech before us. I would just like to comment a little bit the position of my colleagues from Egypt. You have a good conclusion, yeah? You are asking about how you can fly, for example, from Cairo to Johannesburg, how you can, or why you can deal with even your neighbor countries, and so on. So my question is now, what really happened? What really happened? Why we can deal among ourselves, South-South cooperation? So, of course, I have the question. I mean, the answer about it is better to give you the floor to answer, yeah? Thank you. That's my first question. But I don't want to comment the previous, speech, because That's the position of our colleagues. I don't want to comment it, but my question is here just to you. Thank you.
Okay, then we will ask later on. Then, please, David. And I think somebody should give microphones, no? Please, here. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent presentations. But the more I listen, I think what is perhaps quite important is for us to understand what it is that is happening. Our description of the current situation, I think it will help us to get a better solution. I think the opening line you mentioned that nothing will help, nothing will change the current order, regardless of what we see in Washington and everywhere else. But I think for me, I would characterize what is happening as more, yes, fragmentation, but also an element of selective globalization. That you tend to see those who are in the forefront of globalization as of formation of G7, mid-70s, and post the oil crisis of early 70s, are the ones who are now retreating as others rise. But they haven't abandoned the entire system of globalization. It's globalization where we have comparative advantage. Your Starlink, and so many areas where they have comparative advantage, we must globalize. In areas where they have disadvantage, let's retreat and close and build walls. And I think that element will be with us for a while. And now the bigger question for us, when you have these zones of regional and selective countries that are globalizing differently, then brings us as in the global south, then what then do we do? BRICS, G20, there are a lot of similarities, I mean, in terms of based on the summits and issues that have been raised. But what, for me, is worrying, and perhaps South Africa's chairship could answer, is actually the lack of a concrete view, particularly among BRIC countries, on the outcome of these tariffs. That's the core, anyway, of BRICS, economic governance. I mean, if you don't agree on that as BRICS countries, I think for me that remains a serious indictment to the group. I think it's always important for us to look in the mirror as BRICS members and say our failure to have just a communique on tariffs, because that's where we're supposed to be speaking with one voice. But I think the lack of that communique, clear communique among BRICS members, also ask questions about the G20 summit in November. Yeah, are we going to have a common BRICS position on G20 in South Africa? Yes or no? If not, why are we wasting time in so many? I think these core questions, we need to confront them instead of just dancing around them. We need to ask these questions. It's important. This year is also, I know, the end of Second World War that you mentioned in the opening. I think for South Africa, in 1955 was also quite critical. The Freedom Charter that defines the internationalism that South Africa is trying to push. But from a global south, there's also an important year that the Bandung Conference was also 1955. So we have to dig the Bandung communique in our discussions about BRICS as well as our discussions about G20, because in it are core questions which were posed in 1955, which remains unanswered. And I think we need to, as we celebrate 70 years, how far BRICS cannot continue to be on expansion, an elite club of the global south. I think it's a continuation of ensure that it does bring in all and push, but there is that need for that strategic. So as we march towards November, we need to ask those core questions. Are we going to unite and face the real challenges? I think for Africa, the question of digital integration, particularly the SWIFT system and others, are quite serious. And lastly, in a provocative way, I would be more interested to hear fellow BRICS countries' response, not just to South Africa that is under total onslaught from Washington. Brazil is also facing the same total onslaught, attacks. Other BRICS countries, as they see the attack, what are they saying? Because I think one of the strategy in Washington is to attack what I call the weakest links. I mean, attack countries such as South Africa, Brazil, because these countries carry, now aiding Egypt, aiding Ethiopia and Nigeria, a strong moral need for the existence of this global South group. And therefore, it would be interesting to hear fellow BRICS in the forefront saying it, instead of saying it in the in corners but publicly to say this is our position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to the last point you made, I'm afraid we overestimate a little bit the American thinking. It's not about weak links in the chain, be it Brazil or South Africa or some other countries. In the world of President Trump, there are very personified issues. In case of Brazil, that's not BRICS in the first position. That's his friend Bolsonaro. And then you see what he does. In case of South Africa, I think this is very much connected to the issue of Israel and Palestine, because for Trump it's very important to show solidarity with Israel. And maybe there is some calculation behind it, which is deeper than I think, but again, maybe we don't need to overestimate the strategic thinking there. Denis.
My name is Denis Degtyaryov. I'm a research fellow. I'm a researcher at the Institute for African Studies, Russian Academy of Sciences. I would like to ask a question to a key speaker, to Pilani. So you mentioned that Trump is pro-industrial and that it could help in some way global South countries to industrialize global South countries. Could you please explain probably theoretical or hypothetical mechanism of how it will happen, right? Because like Trump here wants to industrialize United States, probably like global South countries will supply more mineral resources to US, but whether it will help them to industrialize, and then probably there will be more disruptions in global value chains, and probably it will favorize regional or Pan-African value chain. So what do you mean by this? Thanks a lot.
Okay, then answers later, as we said. Maybe, please, the next lady.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the floor. Indeed, excellent presentations. I just want to echo a little bit what I heard from the discussants, not only the presenters. I'm very much deeply impressed by the Gustavo principle of agreed to disagree. I don't know if this has ever been exercised in any other international organization, so to speak. So this is new. This is maybe even more advanced than the consensus thing. But then again, as we speak of a crisis of multilateralism, and as we all probably agree that we seek to relaunch it, we all understand that multilateral discussion can only happen between peers, right? And for that, we need to enhance our own capacities, and in terms of industrialization as well. This is what Pilani has said. And the reason I'm talking about this is that I think we've had so much discussion. Again, as Gustavo has mentioned, it is wonderful for me as a researcher to be able to attend all of these wonderful conferences. And Elena, you are right that shaping global narratives is one of the things that BRICS has been very adept at. But one of the reasons I think BRICS is not moving forward as fast as it could have is that by so many people, even in the BRICS countries and BRICS partner countries, it is seen as an elite project. By Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro, Da Silva, everyone is just thinking of who is the next guy in power, who is the next guy in charge. And this is the kind of, this goes back not just to the 20th century. This is actually thinking of absolutist monarchies, personalist regimes from the 19th century, when the fate of an entire corporation history was hinging upon the decision of a certain person. So this is something that BRICS could probably step away from. So we should put into practice, we should implement projects that will help the people. So, also that the people know that this, this hydropower project was initiated and completed thanks to BRICS. This is the payment system that was completed and put into practice thanks to BRICS countries. And when it comes to industrializing, I totally support this viewpoint that this is the number one thing without which it doesn't make any sense, to be having any conversations about pushing, the new world economic order or changing the global governance rules. Maybe we should look at the Comic-Con experience from the Soviet times for the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, where we actually used to have certain countries or clusters of countries that were responsible for certain economic sectors, that that you have a certain technology from one country, and then probably certain human capital from another country, and then you can coordinate all of it better, and then you do not have to force all the countries to follow a single roadmap, if we can put it that way. But at the same time, you can help all the member states and the partner states advance their vision for a stronger economy. So that would be my suggestion, perhaps open to discussion if you would like to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sanusha.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the panelists and discussants. Very informative, and there's one thing that I'm intrigued or fascinated about is the language we use to characterize an international system.
So if we're talking about an international system that's inclusive, that's sustainable, that's equitable, I mean, these are the terms we use. It seems that the way we go about it is not necessarily the language that reflects that, because we talk then in very kind of heavy anchored language of competition, of polycrisis, of the kind of competitiveness, the race to the bottom. What are we racing towards? That's the other issue. And it seems as if that is the challenge, because the architecture that we're really afraid of is what's going to happen. And we're not prepared for what's going to come. So I would just like some reflection on the fact that we want a reformed international architecture, but is the language that we're using so heavily caught in the kind of zero-sum game that the alternative to the alternative is not the alternative? And inevitably, I think the challenge for us is whether we use, you know, the right to agree to disagree, the issue of consensus, whatever, is that it doesn't reflect what is the structural conditions in the international system based on how we see the nation state. How do we see the actual clubs and fora that we have created to try and address what is wrong with, or the diagnosis of what is seriously wrong with the international system, but we're not prepared to take that bold step to be like Star Trek, right? To go where nobody dares to go, because it means that you've got to give up your power to do that. And that's what I never picked up in the conversation of power. To get to where you want, you've got to give up some power, if not lots of power, in order to have the UN and all of these institutions that are supposed to underwrite a global governance reform agenda. And nation states no longer are willing to do that. So I think it's the push and pull of the G20, the BRICS, where you are in a contestation of push and pull. What is your low-hanging fruit and what you're not prepared to go towards? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alec.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to react to what Mr. David Monnier said, and I totally agree with you, because, and what Fyodor said at the beginning, that not everybody expected this year BRICS summit in Brazil that something light, because Brazil had a very good job a year ago on G20, then they have at the end of this year the COP summit on climate and so on. But it was Mr. Trump with all his initiatives and his tariff war. But you're absolutely right, because there was a possibility for BRICS to show solidarity and to become, let's name it, the united front of the global south against, so BRICS is not against everything, but in that sense to be against Trump tariff wars. But it was not done, because in the communique of the Brazilian BRICS summit, it was just one phrase included in one paragraph, that BRICS don't like unilaterally imposed tariffs because they are destructive for global economy and development of the global south, and nothing more. And except of this phrase, which is hidden somewhere in the deep, in many pages of the final declaration, the declaration is more or less the same as it was the last year. So if nothing happened. And I understand, and many colleagues said very frankly that, okay, BRICS is not just a talk shop or just a coffee shop, but on the way to be a real strength, a real unified strength of the global south, we have still much way to go. And it's a pity for me, yeah. And another point, also, I'd like to make one more product placement of the Valdai Club, because you mentioned Bandung Conference and the anniversary of the Bandung Conference. With our Indonesian colleagues, we prepared a special report on the Bandung anniversary and how it is important now. And everybody, you can also find it at the website of the Valdai Club. And now in the Bandung year, Indonesia is very visible to our website. We had a conference in Jakarta, and many Indonesian experts post their expert columns on the Valdai site. So in that sense, at least we corporately we understand the importance of the Bandung spirit. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add that we are always welcoming any contributions on the Valdai site. Indonesia really, they are very active, and we have a lot of friends from South Africa, but of course we would love to have more. So please. Igor.
I think it works. Igor Istomin, MGIMO University, Moscow. Thank you so much for a fascinating presentation and a very interesting discussion. And I just thought, because we are talking about kind of value of international institutions, what value they bring, and my contribution perhaps will go in line with what Gustavo already said. When we think about what they add, institutions like BRICS, for example, we often tend to think and focus on cooperative side. However, very often they are more important in managing differences than in creating harmony. And I think in relation to the Bandung conference to 1955, it seemed that it is more differences within Global South now than it was at that point in time. And I think it's somewhat natural to have it, because as these countries develop, as they acquire ambitions, their own ambitions on international arena, of course their ideas, their views of the world could be more divergent than convergent. And I think in this regards, BRICS is important in two instances. First, we need to think and look at non-events, things that didn't happen because of BRICS. And another thing that we, I think, should take into account is the sidelines, not only the declaration. A lot of was said about what is written in the declaration, but there is a lot of what going on the sides of the BRICS meetings, and which are not included in that. And one, I think, particular example from the last year in Kazan, when there was a meeting organized in Kazan between the leaders of China and India, which helped to resolve or somehow soften the border disputes that exist between these countries. And I think this is a very important contribution of BRICS, and the fact that it is not reflected in the declaration does not diminish its value. I think it's maybe one of the very important results of that meeting. So I think if we try to explain the value of BRICS and maybe other multilateral formats, we need to be frank about the fact that the countries, even like-minded countries, do not always agree with each other, and that these meetings are helpful in this managing differences aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question then. We have no time more.
Thank you. I'm Prel Singh. I'm from the Institute for Security Studies. I just have two quick questions I'd like to put to the speakers. And thank you for a fascinating discussion. The first issue I'd like to just put out there is your thoughts on this kind of bloated, substantive agenda we're witnessing year after year. We are seeing communiques, joint statements stemming out of like the G20 and the BRICS, for example, that are, you know, a page longer, a page longer, a page longer, a page longer. And I feel like, you know, it's almost the path of least resistance when you cannot agree on the most fundamental and challenging dimensions of your diplomatic club or your partnership, to then expand out in each and every direction. So we've seen this, for example, in, you know, cultural aspects of BRICS, cultural aspects of the G20, which I'm not saying is a bad thing in any way. I'm just saying, I just like to get your thoughts on, do you feel that this bloated substantive agenda is somewhat diluting or weakening the potency of the BRICS and the G20? The second issue I'd just like to put out there is, and before I say this, I'm not arguing against inclusivity in any way. I think inclusivity is always an excellent thing in any diplomatic grouping or club. But I think we need to have a very serious discussion on the merits of exclusivity, especially within the BRICS, especially as we consider questions of expanded membership within the grouping. You know, a couple of years ago, we would very readily refer to the BRICS as almost the sharp end of the spear of the global south. It was a potent force. It was still largely ill-defined and ambiguous, but it was really a driving force for a global south agenda. And you know, one direction for us to strengthen that agenda is to expand outwards, bring in new members, and so on. But I feel, again, and I'd like to get your thoughts. You know, do you believe this in some way dilutes or weakens the overall potency of BRICS if we don't more jealously safeguard the exclusivity of the grouping? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can respond in the reversed order, and please keep each response to 2 minutes. Nurhan.
Thank you so much for your ideas. First of all, I wanted to respond to Professor Niki's. You think of what has really happened, and I think it's deeply packed to colonization era, divided and rule. They succeeded to push forward some divisions, ideas among the South, and sometimes it is the idea of competition. That's why I mentioned that global South became more matured. Okay, competition. It means that it is okay, but struggle. And if the competition will block some cooperation, I think this is the wrong way. And I think we became more matured, and cooperation, partnership is the only way to grow and to develop all of us. If we trying to be the only developed country, any of our countries, we will not succeed. We should have the idea of growing together, developing together. This is the only way to push forward the development in all our countries. So sometimes politics, you know, spoiled the cooperation, but I think we became more matured. This is what I and also the idea raised quickly about BRICS and BRICS. I think it's very important. If BRICS really doesn't matter or doesn't affect the global economy and the world order in general, I think the United States wouldn't, but Trump in particular, wouldn't care a lot about it. BRICS now, it's more than 15 years, it's 16 years old, and why Trump at that moment now caring a lot about BRICS, and he's that much worry about BRICS. But I think whatever he declared, he will not be able to block or to delay BRICS. The train is already started its way, and nobody will able to stop it. Okay, if it may be delayed, maybe some countries like Saudi Arabia hesitated to join BRICS, but the train of BRICS already started its way, and nobody will be able to stop it. I think also BRICS, some of your comments, BRICS not necessary to have one agenda, okay, or one dominant agenda. BRICS trying to have a consensus among countries. It doesn't matter that we should have one currency. No, it is not necessary. What's the problem if we are dealing with the national currencies, as India suggests, and Russia also before? That actually the idea is originally for Russia, and it was introduced to the whole world. Even with Egypt, 2015, 10 years ago, President Putin pushed forward the idea during his visit to Egypt. So I think this is important. We shouldn't be the same. We all in one, but we can keep our diversity in economic system, in political system, but we can have some consensus and some common goals. Yeah, I think BRICS is working on global commons, generally global commons economically, politically, environmentally, etc. And this is what I see important. And this is why BRICS is strong, because it is not unified us, but it's trying to fill the gaps and to be closer and to all go forward. Thank you.
Nurhan, when you say that the BRICS train has already get started, I know the route. It's Cairo, Cape Town, yeah.
I would say Moscow, Cairo.
Okay, but then Beijing, Moscow, Cairo, Cape Town. Gustavo.
I think I'm going to reflect a little bit on Priya's questions, because I think it touches on what others have said, and I think you make a fair point. Does the bloated substantive agenda of BRICS dilute its own effectiveness? And I think you have different visions from different camps, and I think they all kind of make sense. One of the camps would say that the agenda is a bit too broad. We do not need to have all of those layers and tiers of discussions, because it becomes very cumbersome for members to really follow through in every discussion. The other side of that coin is that, because there's often that like, well, but the G7 agenda is not much broader, like it's much more narrow than what BRICS is. The answer would be that BRICS countries do not have any other institution, formal or informal, where they can cooperate on those issues. And that very much gets reflected within the declaration every year. 90% of the 30, 40, 50 pages declaration that gets approved every year is basically endorsement of sectorial discussions and showcasing progress on specific areas. I think the biggest issue there, and I think it became very clear with now in 2025, especially because this became a core point of priority within the 2025 presidency, is how effective or not some of these mechanisms are. And I think it's always important to refer to this very recent document that has been published by the BRICS Think Tanks Council, where they mapped different cooperation mechanisms within BRICS, found that there was over 180 mechanisms, and even that you see the two sides of the story. The first thing that when I read that document was like, oh, there is a lot of them that are overlapping, never met, has never really been able to give one particular output, but a lot of them have. If we're looking to the engagements from ministries of finance, if we're looking to the work plan, agricultural work plan 2025-2028, all of these is quite interesting things, and you increasingly start seeing that. So for me, the issue is not so much how big the agenda is or not, but do we have the mechanisms that can not only create mechanisms within BRICS to deal with specific issues, and we also have mechanisms to close them if we don't feel like they are useful anymore. The terms of reference of the members talks specifically around the role of the chair, that it's able to convene meetings, to create some of these mechanisms and so on. But in terms of reference, does not talk specifically about how do we close them down, how do we monitor and track what they have been doing, and how do we identify this longer term process around that. The exclusivity versus inclusivity, that was very much the discussion that we saw in 2023 in Johannesburg, with Brazil in particular being the country most uneasy with the idea of expansion. For Brazil, there was a sense of Brazil tends to like, I'm Brazilian originally, by the way, so Brazil tends to like being in exclusive groups. That it's been a big part of its foreign policy for over 100 years. But the fear that Brazil had was that if we make this too big, we have another G77 in our hands, where it's too big to manage and we don't know how to do that. The other side of the coin, so I'm not answering, I'm just giving you the different camps, because I think it's perhaps more useful to see what are the benefits in each of them, is that for a lot of the initiatives and projects that are currently being discussed within BRICS, you need that scale. And that scale is required to, if you want to make the discussions on use of local currency sustainable, you need more countries and you need different nodes of connectivity, especially considering how diverse the monetary policies of all of the BRICS countries are. If you're talking about the increasing role of the new development bank, of course the bank from a formal point of view has a different role. There's a treaty, an agreement that has created it. It's a formal institution, and the expansion of the bank is separate from that. But increasingly, the bank is playing a much broader role, and we're seeing the new members really looking into those institutions with a lot of interest. I think for now, the big discussion is not there's no likelihood of a new expansion happening anytime soon. There's no consensus amongst members, and primarily the debates that they're having now is that how do we better incorporate the new members? That is still quite uneven. That is something that is still going to take longer time, and I think the challenge in there is that there's going to be a new identity within the group once this adaptation process is over. The challenge is that we don't know what that identity will look like, because we invited new members to join expecting that they would bring their flavor, their objectives, their priorities and so on. That in itself is going to change quite drastically on how we reach consensus. We are already seeing this year declarations not being approved because there was no consensus. How do we deal with the voluntary nature of the group, and how do we make sure that this expansive agenda is not necessarily curtailed, but managed? I think at this stage, what it lacks is management of the agenda. That for me is more problematic than the bigger agenda itself. Thanks.
Well, talking about the consensus, certainly the question of consensus is becoming crucial with the new members of BRICS. And in this regard, I would say that strengthening the BRICS spirit and the BRICS identity is very important. And but BRICS has also a multi-format and multilateral, multi-layer cooperation, because we have BRICS outreach format, BRICS plus format, new members, membership and new members. So if we're talking about the future, it may be possible that the further cooperation would be in a format like a la carte, menu a la carte. So the countries could choose the track and also the velocity. Thank you.
No, thank you, colleagues. I think colleagues have addressed, a lot of them, so I'll just limit myself to just these ones. I think, yeah, the importance of South-South cooperation has to continue to be elevated, absolutely. And when we're talking about South-South cooperation, I think there's an important opportunity to look at also the financing of development. So to look at concessional finance mechanisms that come from, whether it's BRICS countries or broader countries from the Global South. I think this is important to show that even whilst funds are drying, but within the Global South, there's still a commitment towards financing and creating different mechanisms for financing development. I think it's well captured in terms of the idea of fragmentation and selective globalization. This is exactly what we have seen. Of course, a retreat from areas where there's no comparative advantage and pushing ahead with areas where they do have comparative advantages. And this is from countries that were at the forefront of founding some of these institutions. You know, when we think about Trump and industrialization, I think it's so, yes, we can focus it on Trump, but I think it precedes Trump. I think it's, if we think about even Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, what they were basically doing is poaching the industrial base of Europe. So Europe is being deindustrialized by the US. If the US had its way, it would be able to take a lot of the industrial base, essentially, from the European countries. And Germany is finding itself at a very difficult position because Germany's industrial base largely stems from having a very solid relationship with Russia and having access to energy from Russia, but also having a strong relationship, obviously, with its European counterparts and also with the US. And so I think if we look at that, these countries are struggling. This could in some way go ahead in answering some of the negative impacts of a potentially pro-industrial policy United States, where it actually does not work to the advantage of other countries industrializing, but actually where it deindustrializes other countries. After all, the US is not really talking about cooperation, it's talking about America first. So as long as our interests are being met, what happens to you, you deal with that on your own. And we're seeing the ramifications of that in Europe. So Europe should be a cautionary tale to some of our countries, actually, because what our priorities are in this region of the world is creating regional value chains. Our interest is not sending, so the perfect illustration is the discussion around critical minerals. From a US perspective, the US would like uninhibited access to critical minerals. So irrespective of what's happening in your countries, whether you're at war, whether you are changing policies, changing administrations, we should have uninhibited access to raw materials, right? Now, the way we're thinking about the use of raw materials is different because that is a more extractive approach coming from the US. Our approach is that how can we utilize our critical minerals to actually move up the value chain? So not so that US corporations can access them as cheap as possible and when they want, but actually our model is to say US corporations should actually come to our region and beneficiate closer to the source of extraction and also closer to the African market and also then, you know, export, let's say, to other markets. So I think in that sense, the impact on regional value chains, it could be negative as we see it in Europe. But however, depending on the way we adapt our policies here in the region, we could also use it, I think, to close ranks and to actually say, I think at times we need to learn to say no. Not all investment is good. At times we talk about foreign direct investment as though, you know, every type of foreign investment is good. So in our region, we need to learn to say no at times. Yes, there might be an immediate benefit in a sense of getting some sort of foreign direct investment, but is that foreign direct investment aiding or inhibiting our approach of creating regional value chains? And if the answer is no, then I think we need to be able to say to corporations from outside the continent, whether they are American, European, or whichever nationality, we need to be able to say, no, this currently does not fall in our current priorities. And therefore, we generally invite foreign direct investment, but you can source those materials in other countries. But to get there, to be able to say no, you have to build up capacity. You cannot just say no and then expect others will not react when you say no. So if we want to execute our strategy of building regional value chains, we actually need to capacitate national, at a national level, but also to enhance coordination at a regional level and at sub-regional levels. Because if we do not do that, then we do not have the material weight to actually say no. And that takes me to what Sanusha was saying around the use of power. You know, power is absolutely central in all of these discussions we're having. Maybe some of the reason why we using, you know, terms as we're using is because, well, the theme today is real politic responses, you know, in a fractured world. So, you know, we are thinking in terms of hard interests. We're talking about, yes, we want to see a better world. But even to achieve a better world, we cannot achieve a better world if we do not actually have the material power, the material capabilities at a national and a regional level to actually take our ideas forward.
Thank you very much, Pilani. It's a good conclusion for our first session. You know, in Russia, in the Soviet Union, he used to be foreign minister for almost 30 years, Andrei Gromyko, and his nickname in the world was Mr. No. And as long as the material force was there, it was very, very good. Then it changed. Thank you very much. There was a good start. We deserved a 20 minutes break.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask that, so